Hi, welcome back. Today we're talking about something that sounds almost impossible until you actually see the numbers, because a mint in Australia just poured a single bar of gold so massive that it broke a world record that had stood for years, and the scale of it is enough to change how you think about gold altogether. We're talking about a bar weighing over 500 kilograms made almost entirely of pure Australian gold and now officially recognized as the largest gold bar ever created. If you've ever pictured a gold bar as something small enough to slide into a briefcase, like in the movies, this story is going to completely reset that image in your mind. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this moment matters. Not just as a curiosity, but as a signal about where gold stands in the world right now. Let's start with the basics, because the details here are genuinely remarkable. The Perth Mint, one of the oldest and most respected precious metals refiners in the world, announced that it had successfully cast a gold bar weighing 521.2 kilograms. Now, this is important because that number isn't just big, it's historic. The previous record for the largest gold bar ever made stood at 300 kilograms. And this new bar didn't just edge past that mark, it blew past it by more than 200 kilograms. To put that in a way that's easier to picture, imagine 2 or 3 grown adults standing on a scale together, and that's roughly the weight we're talking about. Except instead of human bodies, it's solid, refined gold. The bar was also refined to a purity level of 99.999%, which in the industry is known as 5 nines purity, meaning it's about as close to perfectly pure gold as modern refining technology can produce. Now here's what this means in practical terms. Creating a bar like this isn't as simple as just melting down a bunch of gold coins and pouring them into a bigger mold. The Perth Mint had to prepare roughly 1.5 tons of raw material, refining it down through multiple stages before it was ready for the final casting. Large bars were produced first, then combined, then loaded into a specially engineered mold designed specifically for this record attempt. From there, the gold was heated to around 1400 degrees Celsius inside what's called a flameless casting chamber, a piece of technology that allows for incredibly precise and controlled melting without the risks that come with traditional open flame methods. After the pour, the bar had to cool slowly and carefully over many hours, because gold at that scale doesn't just solidify instantly, and any rushed cooling could introduce cracks, inconsistencies, or structural weaknesses that would ruin months of planning in an instant. Think about it this way. If you've ever tried to bake something large, like a big batch of bread or a thick cake, you know that the bigger the item, the harder it is to get an even result all the way through. The outside might look perfect, while the inside is still soft or undercooked. Now scale that same challenge up to molten gold, weighing over half a ton, and you start to understand why this wasn't something the Perth Mint could just decide to do on a whim. It took more than 35 specialists from the Mint's refinery and assay laboratory teams working together with precision engineering and years of institutional experience to plan and execute this successfully. This wasn't a marketing stunt thrown together in a weekend. It was a genuine technical achievement built on more than a century of refining expertise. Now let's talk about where the gold actually came from, because this part matters too. The bar was made using gold sourced entirely within Australia, with contributions coming from a long list of major mining companies operating across the country. Some of the biggest names in Australian gold production were involved in supplying the raw material that eventually became this record-breaking bar. This wasn't gold pulled from a vault somewhere or imported from overseas. It came directly from Australian ground, refined on Australian soil, by an Australian institution with deep historical roots going back to 1899, when the Perth Mint first opened its doors in response to the massive gold discoveries happening across Western Australia at the time. Here's what this means for the bigger picture, and this is where things start to get really interesting. Western Australia has long been recognized as one of the most significant gold-producing regions on the planet. But this record isn't just about digging gold out of the ground. It's about what happens after that, the refining, the processing, and the value that gets added once raw material becomes something usable and internationally recognized. Officials in the Western Australian government pointed to this achievement as proof of the state's advanced refining capability, not just its mining output. In other words, this record is as much a story about human skill and engineering as it is about the gold itself. Let's pause here for a moment because I want you to think about the scale of gold on a broader level, since numbers like 500 kilograms can be hard to fully grasp without some context. A standard gold bar that most people picture, the kind you'd see stacked in a bank vault in a movie, typically weighs around 12.5 kilograms, sometimes called a good delivery bar, and that's already considered heavy and valuable. Now imagine roughly 40 of those bars melted down into a single, solid block. That's essentially what we're talking about here. It's not just a bigger version of a normal bar, it's an entirely different category of object, closer to a monument than a typical unit of currency or investment. Now, if you're new to this channel, welcome. And if you've been here before, you already know we like to break down big financial and market stories in a way that actually makes sense without any unnecessary complexity. So, if this kind of content is useful to you, consider subscribing because we cover stories like this regularly, especially around gold, silver, and the bigger economic forces shaping how people think about money and value today. Let's get back to the story because there's an emotional layer to this too that's worth mentioning. Gold has always carried a certain weight, beyond its literal physical weight, if you'll forgive the pun. Throughout history, across almost every culture on Earth, gold has represented permanence, trust, and value that doesn't erode the way paper currency can. When people see something like this, a single massive gleaming bar of nearly perfect gold, it tends to stir something beyond just financial curiosity. It becomes a symbol. And that's part of why stories like this tend to capture public attention so quickly, even among people who don't follow markets closely. There's something almost primal about seeing raw material transformed into something this valuable and this rare. Of course, it's worth stepping back and asking a reasonable question here, which is, does this actually matter for everyday investors? Or is it just an interesting headline with no real-world impact? And that's a fair thing to wonder. This particular bar isn't going to be sold, traded, or melted down for coins and jewelry. According to the Perth Mint, it's going to be placed on public display, eventually becoming a permanent exhibit alongside another of the Mint's famous creations, the 1-ton gold coin, which itself held a Guinness World Record as the largest gold coin ever minted, a title it's held since 2012. So on a purely transactional level, this specific bar won't circulate through the gold market at all. But here's why this story still matters beyond the spectacle. It reflects something real about the state of the gold industry and the confidence major mining companies currently have in demonstrating their production capabilities publicly. Think about it this way. Companies don't typically invest resources into a project like this unless they see clear value in showcasing their technical strength and their role in a growing high-demand market. Gold has remained a consistent focus for both individual investors and central banks around the world in recent years, and projects like this tend to reinforce public awareness and interest in the metal, even if indirectly. Now let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of why creating something like this is so difficult in the first place, because it's not just about having enough gold. Purity is one of the biggest challenges. Achieving that 5/9's purity level, 99.999%, requires extremely advanced refining processes to remove even the smallest traces of other metals or impurities. At smaller scales, this is already a demanding process. At the scale of 500-plus kilograms, maintaining that level of purity consistently throughout the entire bar becomes exponentially more difficult, because any inconsistency in temperature, cooling speed, or material blending can create uneven purity levels in different parts of the bar. Here's another layer worth understanding. When gold cools from a liquid state into a solid block, especially at this scale, there's a real risk of internal stress fractures forming as different parts of the metal cool at different rates. The outer layer touching the mold cools faster than the core, which stays hot longer. If that process isn't carefully controlled, you can end up with a bar that looks fine on the outside but has weaknesses on the inside. That's part of why the cooling process for this record bar took many hours rather than happening quickly, and why the flameless casting chamber technology played such a critical role in maintaining consistent, controlled heat throughout the entire pour. Let's shift now to what this might mean looking forward while keeping a balanced perspective, because it's easy to get swept up in headlines like this and assume they signal something bigger than they actually do. This record doesn't necessarily predict where gold prices are headed, and it shouldn't be interpreted as some kind of hidden signal about future market movements. What it does show, fairly clearly, is that gold refining technology continues to advance, and that major producing regions like Western Australia are actively investing in showcasing their capabilities on a global stage. Whether that translates into higher gold production, increased investor interest, or simply serves as a long-term tourism and branding asset for the Perth Mint remains to be seen over the coming years. Now, here's a simple way to think about all of this if you're trying to connect it back to your own financial understanding. Gold's value has never really come from any single dramatic event or headline. It comes from consistency, scarcity, and trust built up over a very long period of time. A record-breaking gold bar doesn't change the fundamentals of how gold is priced or traded day to day, but it does serve as a reminder of just how much effort, precision, and institutional trust goes into producing gold at every level, from a small 1-ounce coin all the way up to a 500-kilogram museum piece. Understanding that process can help you appreciate why gold has remained a trusted store of value across generations, long before modern financial markets even existed. It's also worth acknowledging a different perspective here, because not everyone sees stories like this the same way. Some people view large-scale demonstrations like this as marketing exercises designed to generate headlines and tourism interest, rather than events with genuine financial significance. And that's a completely reasonable way to look at it, too. A single record-breaking bar doesn't change supply and demand dynamics in the broader gold market, and it shouldn't be treated as some kind of major economic indicator on its own. The real value in this story lies more in what it represents about craftsmanship, national industry pride, and the ongoing relationship between people and one of the oldest forms of stored value in human history, rather than anything that should directly influence someone's financial decisions. As we start to wrap things up, let's zoom out one more time. This bar will eventually sit on public display, likely drawing visitors from around the world curious to see, in person, just how large a single piece of pure gold can actually become. For the Perth Mint, it stands as a symbol of over a century of refining expertise. For Western Australia, it stands as a demonstration of industrial capability that goes beyond simply extracting resources from the ground. And for everyday people watching this story unfold from thousands of miles away, it offers a rare, tangible glimpse into just how much scale, precision, and human effort goes into producing something we so often think of only in terms of price charts and market tickers. So to summarize everything we've covered today, a mint in Western Australia successfully created and officially registered the largest gold bar in history, weighing just over 521 kilograms, refined to nearly perfect purity, using gold sourced entirely from Australian mining operations. It took more than 35 specialists, advanced flameless casting technology, and many hours of careful, controlled cooling to bring this project to life, surpassing a previous record that had stood at 300 kilograms. While this particular bar won't enter circulation or trading markets, it stands as both a technical achievement and a symbolic reminder of gold's enduring value across history. Stories like this don't necessarily predict where markets are headed next, but they do offer a fascinating window into the scale, precision, and human craftsmanship behind one of the world's oldest and most trusted forms of value. Thanks for watching all the way through. If you found this story interesting, let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to keep learning about gold, silver, and the bigger financial stories shaping today's economy, stick around, because there's a lot more where this came from. See you in the next one.